So my name is Dominic. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Neurofounders. I started last year to cover all the amazing things that are happening in neurotech. It really is sometimes, at the start it felt a bit like a niche, but I don't think you can call it a niche because there's so many diverse things happening, from consumer wearables to, the ever popular invasive BCIs that everyone talks about, and of course a whole budding industry of neuromodulation, which is more and more coming into patient populations and clinical care. So that's also why today we wanted to change the content format from the traditional written articles to a webinar. And if you don't know the Neurofounders regular content, I would definitely ask you to check out the website. There's a lot of interesting articles. But for now, I hope you can enjoy the conversation that we have prepared for today. I've prepared this conversation with Jemima. She's a guest writer, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi everyone, nice to be here and exciting to see so many people joined. I'm Jemima and I've recently joined Neurofounders as a contributor, and I am supporting Dom with the launch and development of this Neurofounders conversation series. And I'll be here in the background and then managing the Q&A section later on.
Yes, so I think that's enough about me and us. Then quickly the plan today. So it's really about discussing non-invasive neuromodulation and specifically in mental health. Neuromodulation is kind of going everywhere, all kind of use cases, but this conversation focuses specifically on mental health disorders. I already wrapped up the introduction, so after this I'll give the word to Ana Maiques from Neuroelectrics, the CEO. And after that, also Fred Walke from Wave Neuroscience will introduce his background and his company. Now we'll have a panel discussion where we have planned a few different areas to discuss. And at the end, there'll be about 10-15 minutes for Q&A as well. For the Q&A, Jemima will be checking the questions, and you can post them throughout in the chats. You can also wait until the end. And I think we will have time for about 5 or 10 questions. So feel free to share them in the chat and we'll check them out at the end. For now, I want to give the word to Ana, and you can share your screen also.
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here in this new Neurofounders initiative. I'm Ana Maiques, CEO and co-founder of Neuroelectrics. And I just have like 2 slides to show you what the technology is like. But, most of you have seen me with the cap on. So, of course, I'm not going to disappoint you, and I'm going to wear it, right? So, for the sake of discussion, and I would like to keep it like super short, like 5 minutes, so you can ask me question. But this technology that I'm wearing can either monitor your brain activity or stimulate your brain. So you see that I'm wearing, it can be up to 32 electrodes. I'm going to take this small device is smaller than a phone. It's placed on the back of your head. And any of the electrodes I'm wearing right now can either monitor your brain, for which we are, of course, FDA and CE mark as a diagnostic tool, but also stimulate the brain, injecting currents into the brain. So I think this is a very relevant non-invasive platform because, if I would show you my real EEG in real time, you see here the brain activity under each electrode. This is non-invasive. It's called EEG, as you may know. And for example, in the case of epilepsy, it can identify epileptic seizures. But also, for example, in the case of depression, we are seeing advancement in looking in mental health, how these EEGs can really indicate maybe mental health issues. And then this is the stimulation paradigm. So you use via the software the capacity to inject electricity into the brain, and you can inject excitatory currents, inhibitory currents, you can do direct current, you can then do alternate current, random noise stimulation. And just to keep it short for the audience, in the case of epilepsy, which is our first indication, you want to do inhibitory current over the focus. And in the case of depression, you're also using excitatory direct current over the frontal lobe, right? So I think that there is a lot of degrees of personalization that you can use, and our company is working on this technology, which we call NeuroTwin, which is building digital replicas of your brain. These are computational neuroscience models of the brain that allow you to really replicate the biophysics and the physiology of your brain, and mapping the networks that are associated, and hopefully being able to, with these technologies in which you have multiple electrodes over the cortical area, select specific targets and networks for different diseases. So in the case of epilepsy, which is here shown, it's very easy because we are dealing with focal epilepsy and you have a specific focus. In the case of mental health, I think that one of the interesting things that we can discuss during the webinar is how, if you suffer depression, maybe your symptoms are anhedonia or, cognitive decline or different symptoms that we think are linked to different networks. So with this technology, you can map those networks and then stimulate those networks. So I think that's kind of like to open what can happen with non-invasive brain stimulation. And remember that you can send patients home. So you have this unique window into the brain in which you stimulate patients at home and you can gather in real time electrophysiological data. So I would leave it here. I just wanted to give you a sense of what the technology can do. And please write down your questions, because I think this will be very dynamic if we engage into a proper conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Fred, then, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that was great. Fred Walke, I'm the CEO and founder of Wave Neuroscience. Just real quick, by way of background, I am not a neuroscientist. I'm not a physician. I am a venture capital CEO. Most of my career is focusing on healthcare, med tech, and spent the first kind of decade of my career running some dental businesses. And in that, I got a thirst for how to disrupt industries and kind of rethink about data and provide better outcomes. And with that, Wave Neuroscience was really founded out of the principle I was looking for something better for a family member, a daughter who was struggling with depression, and we could not get a proper diagnosis or any interventions. And I met this technology about 2015, and it just had a profound, not only impact on my daughter's life and turning her around over the course of about 3 weeks from depressed, never leaving her room, crying every day, failing out of school, to very happy, outgoing, went on to her junior, senior year, did very well. That inflection point of a neuroscientist stepping out after doing a 10-minute eyes closed EEG, which is the foundation of how we begin our process here at Wave, and was able to tell me things about my daughter, both from a personality standpoint, phenotype, and then also with her illness of slowing in the frontal lobe. It really changed the game of empathy. It changed the way that I looked at her. And at that point, I had just left a business that I had worked out for a company up in LA. And I said, why isn't this not more widely known? And I said, we're in the early stages of this. And I said, why is this not the standard? And so what I realized, and so I take a different approach to this, while yes, I understand the data and the science and can go down those rabbit holes, I really focus on the opportunity to use data as a pivot point in industry. And while we can collect data, can we truly understand it? And then can we do something to manipulate it? And with Wave Neuroscience, what we've created is a SaaS platform. We are already commercial. We are also pre-FDA. We just completed an FDA trial in the fall. We received breakthrough designation on that technology a year ago, and the results were spectacular in the trial, reaching primary endpoints, and some spectacular data has come out of that. And so Wave Neuroscience sits today. We're an assistant tool to a physician in helping them personalize forms of neuromodulation, primarily TMS, which is an incredibly effective tool that I think potentially was miscategorized by the FDA and under its original launch as a treatment for treatment-resistant depression. It's an incredible tool, and it can do a whole host of things. And when personalized and set properly, it's been extraordinary to see the results that physicians around the world are getting using what we call our MERT platform. And so I'll pause there, but looking forward to today. And thank you for having me and having us on.
Yeah, thank you, Fred. Maybe a good question already is, you do not have a hardware product, right? Mostly a software layer.
We are not a hardware company. We do have some hardware that we've developed, an in-home device. We don't talk about it much because it's not really a core focus to us. We are a data company. We like to improve the efficacy and use of technologies. And then if we do this right, we should be the catalyst of future innovation around technology by determining some endpoints that could be met if the technology could get there.
Yeah. I think a big overlap between both companies here is that personalization aspect. And it's also something that keeps returning in the conversation. I think precision psychiatry has been a term that's been around for many years, but only now you see, well, with neurotech, you can actually personalize treatments to every single user. So it would be nice to dive into that a little bit further and maybe give one more layer of technical detail on how you in your respective company are actually personalizing the treatment option for every individual patient. What input are you using, and yeah, what does that look like?
So from our standpoint, we're utilizing any EEG, off-the-shelf EEG. We focus on 21 leads, and we do what is called an eyes closed resting EEG state. So 10-minute eyes closed resting. We record that time, and then through algorithms, we look for interesting data within that report or that data set, and ill-performing neurons. We focus primarily on the default mode network, and in that, we have created algorithms and decision trees that help determine an optimal frequency to treat somebody at across a whole host of indications, keeping in mind that TMS is only on label for a few indications. Our first kind of entrance through FDA is for PTSD, but we have one trial completed, 2 trials in motion, 2 that will start early next year. And our goal is to kind of bring the technology devices to the masses and move them up to kind of the front end of the patient journey versus the last step after many other things have failed. But we've taken the standard of making sure that we can utilize all devices that are in market. And so we currently overlay on, call it 5 of the 7 major TMS companies, and then virtually any EEG that has a quality signal that we like. And then from our AI standpoint, because we have over 100,000 pre-post database of patients, we're able to take a lesser lead, call it 3, 5, 7 leads, and create an array that virtually replicates a 21 lead for an individual using both normative and some of our other data sets. So we really are looking to take small data and create big pictures with that, say kind of what our end goals.
So maybe for some extra context, TMS is obviously also non-invasive, but there's really a wide variety of intensities you can apply to a patient, right? So what you're doing with these EEG readings is mostly lowering the intensity, if I understand it correctly, right?
You're precisely right. We're about 50% motor threshold, where FDA was 120% motor threshold, and we target frequencies, not necessarily, alpha specifically, but we generally will be in that alpha range, and sometimes we will prescribe a frequency to get some activity or some movement prior to really getting to the optimized frequency that we're seeking. But yeah, we're both frequency and amplitude.
Is that also something that you, Ana, do at Neuroelectrics, using that EEG to maybe use lower stimulation levels? You're muted.
Yeah, and I think that Fred is totally right. I think that for the people in the audience, I think that EEG has been very, let's say, misutilized, compared to imaging techniques, right, throughout the last, 34 years. And I think that it's now with AI and many other tools that we have, the fact that we can do these devices that are portable, that we can really scale what EEG can do as biomarker or as precision neuropsychiatry, right? Because most of the neurological and psychiatric world is based on questionnaires, right? The DSM-4 and subjective data, right? And having this, way to personalize based on objective EEG data, I think is super important. I think that also from Neuroelectrics, what we are doing, which I will show in epilepsy as an example, we are taking also other data. So in our pivotal FDA trial, and I think this is very important because for stimulation, this is what we are doing in epilepsy, right? We are asking, you can see in the video, we are asking every neurologist to do an EEG with or without our device, standard practice in epilepsy, and then do an MRI of the patient's brain. And based on these two streams of data, the doctor has to tell us what is the target map. So in this case, this is where the focus is coming from, and blue is inhibition. And then our platforms builds a 3D model of the brain based on the MRI, the thickness of the skull, the conductivity, like the physics. And then we start to compute, how many electrodes and how much electrodes and how much current do we need to inject into that brain to get to the target map. And the patient receives at the hospital a core code hardware and software that takes into account the outcome of the computational neuroscience brain. So to a certain degree, I think in epilepsy, we are doing it. I know that, EEG-guided TMS and precision in TMS is strong. I would love this approach to be seen not only in epilepsy, but, but also, by drug companies and other players, right? DBS, and really make sure that this can be highly personalized. Ideally non-invasive.
Yeah. Anything else to add on that topic, Fred?
Yeah, I mean, Anne's spot on. If you look at the difficulties in healthcare, specifically in psychiatry, we're talking mental health, our goal is to introduce the principles of physical medicine and objective biomarkers. And there's Dr. Charlie Nemeroff out of UT Austin says many times about us that we're the first company to bring a biomarker-guided platform to mental health care. I don't know if that is or is not true. I would assume that it is, given his experience. That being said, fMRI is interesting. You see a lot of groups going after fMRI, and mass structure matters, blood flow matters. But I think what we're measuring is the ultimate performance of the organ by way of EEG. And if there is something that indicates there may be something more substantial happening, or we're not seeing the activity we would expect to see, you can always dive deeper into those more expensive, more elaborate tests. But to really solve the bottleneck and the issues that are happening across society relative to mental health is bring more curative care to people sooner and bring more insights to them that are actionable. And EEG is one of the lowest costs. I mean, it's less than going to a really bad dinner at an average restaurant today. I mean, we can do EEGs for $40 and they're incredibly data rich, right? And so when you think about how to solve the problems, it's not necessarily introducing more data to the problem. It's really parsing through the data that we have and figuring out the most optimized way to get a clear picture and action on that. And that's kind of the approach we're taking. And I think Ana really articulated that well.
Yeah. Now I'd love to move on to the second point, which is zooming out a bit and looking more at the market as a whole. Both of you are seasoned medtech executives and founders, and one of the biggest trade-offs in that field is always, at what point is the product ready for market? Obviously, you do have to go through clinical trials, but at what point do you engage in commercialization and take those steps? And yeah, that general trade-off between scientific validation and moving towards clinical adoption. How do you address that tension? Maybe starting with you, Ana.
In Neuroelectrics, this cap that you see that is doing EEG and brain stimulation, our company was founded in 2011, and we started to sell our technology as a tool to do brain research. So currently today, and Dart Banat from my team, she's in the audience, and she's been doing a phenomenal work in getting especially the US market to adopt our technology. But we are, our technology for EEG and stimulation as a research tool is being used in 75 countries. And we ship around 500 devices per year. So, we've been working with scientists for a long time. And it is back in 2016, 5 years after we created the company, that we decided to bet ourselves in specific indications like epilepsy and depression and down the line cognitive decline. So I think that what it takes to commercialize is that in diagnostics, the EEG, now that we are also CE mark and FDA, it's such a burden. I am a bit jealous of Fred because he doesn't have hardware, because I have a factory, which means that we have to go through all the regulatory agencies, the license to manufacture medical devices, audits. So, full operations to have a factory. I think it's so hard that it also is one of the areas of the company that I'm most proud that we can ship these devices. But that's one of the things you can do, even if you want to become a company that does stimulation and EEG, if the EEG can be easily launched into the market, you do it. And now with the team, we are selling into emergency rooms of major hospitals as a quick diagnostics of people coming unconscious to the emergency room, and also to pharma companies for clinical development. So that is an example. For the stimulation, until we don't have the readout of our phase 3 by the FDA, we cannot sell stimulation as a therapy nowhere after we complete this phase 3. So stimulation is not available to be used unless you're a research center with an IRB doing a brain stimulation study. So that's kind of the difference between the two.
And for you, Fred, running without hardware.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in the hardware business before, and I knew that I didn't want to tackle both hardware and software. And so we chose the software side because there's a lot of plug and play to hardware today that if you can spec something correctly, you can get somebody to build something for you relatively quickly. And so we really focused on data and helping people understand the rich data set that sits within an EEG and then how to utilize that. And so from our approach, one, we focus on safety first. Everything is, can we improve the safety profile of what the FDA has already authorized? And if that's 120% above the threshold, can we reduce safety? And the answer was yes, but we need to improve precision. I talked to a lot of the early people that got the original FDA indication, treatment-resistant depression, and asked, why'd you pick 10 hertz? And it was, well, it's the middle of the bell-shaped curve. I said, well, why didn't you go back and then optimize right and left of that based off an EEG reading? And they just didn't. And it seemed too logical to maybe move in that direction. And so from our standpoint, we're already commercial, not by design. Effectively, the market was asking us to support them in helping improve TMS outcomes. And so looking at EEG data, we would provide a protocol. Doctor would say, yes, we like that protocol. So we sit behind the prescription. The doctor can use it or not use it. And so we effectively just gave them recommendations and things that we saw that were interesting. They would program the device and the outcomes were starting to improve. And so we are now 6 years commercial. We have about 160 locations around the world, and we're growing at about a 50% CAGR right now. Our FDA trial completed. We're hoping to get a clearance sometime in the first half of the year, but the FDA is a bit of the wild west right now, so we're not really sure what that timing looks like. But with that is our goal is to move TMS on label for multiple indications, and then use EEG as a longitudinal biomarker to help understand brain states, with the ultimate goal of reducing the cost of care, bringing people access to it sooner, talking about objective data sets that both the layman, customer, and physicians can understand. And with that, if we're successful in that, we would see TMS be cleared for more indications, but also bringing in more immersive therapies. Think of combining TMS, TDCS, phonic stem, binaural beats, creating more of an immersive therapy where we can maybe get to outcomes sooner and reduce the burden.
Yeah. Obviously, reducing the burden is one of the biggest challenges. But just on that same topic about commercial scaling of not just your technology, but just neuromodulation and non-invasive neurotech in mental health, being so close to the industry, what do you see as the main challenges in scaling these technologies right now?
Again,
Yeah, go ahead, Fred.
I'll be quick on this one. It's an interesting industry in that it's hard to work. So, I'm a CEO, medtech CEO. I'm not a neuroscientist. I try to hire the best people I can find for the purpose of improving commercial aspects of the industry more rapidly. So not jeopardizing safety, not jeopardizing outcomes. I'll do the best studies that are out there. We've raised over $60 million to conduct FDA trials thus far, right? So I'm not afraid to spend what I find is it's a disjointed, disconnected industry, that there's camps that don't necessarily get along with each other, and it's stifling the innovation and collaboration. They see each other as a competitor, where I'm looking for a more cohesive approach. And I'll touch on it quickly and kick it to you, Ana. I started a foundation about 3 years ago called Just One Wave, and it's a derivative of Wave Neuroscience in the name convention, but it's really about bringing all the resources together as just one way to stamp out mental illness as we know it today. And if we brought all the smartest people, data scientists and medical providers and institutions, and really took a conscious role of getting rid and solving for this transient mental health that is solvable, but most people wait 5-7 years before they'll be seen by a physician because they don't want to be stereotyped. What if we treated it like a cold and we could push people through a system that really give them curative outcomes? That's my goal. And so I think it's a bit of a disjointed industry. There's a little bit of infighting. And if everyone realizes we're on the same team serving humanity, I think we get to incomes faster.
Yeah, amazing answer, of course. Ana, do you want to add on to that?
No, I totally agree with Fred. I think that especially in mental health, it's such a disaster when you think of all the people that are suffering from depression or responding to medications. And there is so much good science, not only, as Fred is saying, on EEG, but on ultrasound and, infrared and photo, whatever, right? Like, the brain is not only biology, but it's also physics, right? The brain is this network of electric connections, and we've been so focused on the biology and not so much on the physics of the brain. So I hope this is a new area, and EEG and these technologies can really help to understand what's going on the brain as a network effect, and how to deal with it. For me, I also feel like this Greek character, Sisyphus, that was pushing this rock. Every time you climb the science rock, with the technology, then there is the regulatory rock, then there is the reimbursement rock, and then there is the market access rock. And as Fred says, you have to break silos and barriers, right? Because I think this is the only way. And what really is exciting is that patients are sick and tired of the same approach to mental health and many of these diseases, and they are really forcing change as well. So I'm also very optimistic that, with the good science, the good approvals, and the good dynamics, we can really, these technologies are easily deployed. It's not like opening scabs. We are talking about non-invasive, right? So there are new models that we can create, as Fred was saying, not stigmatizing people. You can do this at home or remotely. And I think that, it goes with the mental health provision of services and how we have to change the way we treat these patients all over the world.
Yeah. And I think when looking at the challenge, it's also worth noting that there were 2 events recently that were quite positive. So we saw the FDA approval of FLOS, transcranial direct current stimulation headset, and also Neurolief's nerve stimulation headset, both for major depressive disorder, both via pre-market approval. So those were quite big milestones, I'd say. And I haven't been in this industry very long, you've been in many years more than me, of course. So does this seem like sort of change in the current, like so like it's speeding up a bit, or how do you view these things happening?
I think these are investments and bets people made years ago. We're finally seeing them come to fruition. I mean, it's no short order to do an FDA trial, double-blind RCT control group. I mean, just to get people to agree on what the endpoint measurement is a difficult feat in some areas of medicine. And so I think you're going to see 2026 kind of be the unlocking of a lot of FDA cleared pathways for different technologies and use cases and combinations of therapies. And I would say that it's probably a decade later than it needed to be, but here we are. And I couldn't be more excited about this space. And I really hope that we get the collaboration of really smart people working together for the purpose of humanity. And I think that the FDA is going through a major change. And I know that technology or software as a medical device, as we're categorized, or technologies, is really the area they're leaning into. It's really the only thing that scales. And if you think of bottlenecks in industry, typically technology is the force multiplier to clear those. And, if you see what Amazon has done to purchasing and shipping, and I think we have the opportunity in healthcare to do the same thing. And, the data is incredibly rich. It's incredibly strong. It's incredibly accurate, and smart people working out and looking for signs and signals in there that we can then influence the technology is the future. And I think the FDA is going to be the pathway for that. I think you're seeing leadership around the FDA really lean in to wanting to help companies that would have otherwise been stifled or failed through the process succeed. So I'm interested to see what 26 holds, but I think it's going to be a bit of a bumper year relative to FDA and the attention mental health care is getting.
Yeah, and maybe for Anna, obviously it's not only about the FDA in the US, but do you see differences in how it's playing out in Europe?
Well, my company is Boston-based and Barcelona-based, and, we regard ourselves as a global company. So I have to say that Europe, the regulation is becoming more similar to the FDA. It used to be kind of easier to get approved in Europe. I don't think that's longer the case. So I see some similarities there. And, in terms of the market, the European market is much more fragmented than the American one in a way, but there's also China. We see a lot of traction in Asia as well. So I think that, to the point of Fred, I think there is a tremendous opportunity to scale up these technologies at a global scale. And there are challenges, but the fact that money is, we did our Series A of 20 million like 3-4 years ago. And at that time, it was super hard to raise any money for a neurotech company. But after Elon Musk put the spotlight into Neuralink and, Synchron and Paradromics and then Precision, and then all these great implanted BCI companies have also spot the light into the non-invasive world. So I think that the field has improved dramatically in the last 3 years, I would say, in terms of visibility, awareness, and investment. And, it's not only, Dominic, as you were saying, that we are seeing the results, it's that more companies are being funded. Look at Neurable. I think that flow is a great success, and I'm very excited. The thing is now, because remember back in the days, I've been in this business a few years, there was the Halo Neuroscience headsets for stimulations. The team was outstanding. But then when they launched it to the market, and of course it's a consumer play, but the results amongst users were very different. So I'm very curious to see, once you launch these technologies into the market, what is the market reception. But the fact that they are FDA clear and ready to be used, I think is a phenomenal step forward. And it will keep on bringing dollars into the field, which is what we need to fund clinical trials, to get, the products improved, the data and everything. So I'm very optimistic, and I encourage the audience, to take a leap on, the entrepreneurship in this field, because we are not short of patients on neuropsychiatry that need different approaches to heal their brain. So I think it's a great area for neuroscience.
Definitely. I think one thing we haven't discussed that much yet is the patients. It's very, for us, it's all very straightforward that this is a way forward, but how is it actually going in the clinics? Is neuromodulation and EEG already something that is used, or even in the awareness of people that are suffering from these disorders?
You're touching on something, and Anna touched on it as well. Here is both disease awareness and understanding of what technology can do as a result of understanding brain function and the correlation to mental health, right? I think us on this call, we probably all understand it to a pretty high degree, but if you take the general population, I don't think they understand that brain function and how your brain is processing information has any correlation to mental health. And so there's a number of initiatives that have to happen simultaneously to really get an uptake in technology. And then ultimately, who's paying for it? Is the payer going to support that? And you gotta remember, we're centuries, if not many decades, of growing up on a pill introducing society where we monitor the side effects of the pills, but the pills were the primary form of treatment. I'm not saying that's good or bad. It just is what it is. And so as you pivot to technology, it's new, it's different, people don't understand it, and it creates an incredible opportunity. I'll pause there. And if Anna, you want to jump in on?
No, I think it's also interesting. I was talking to Emile from Sapphire Neuroscience, and she was really adamant about educating consumers, and she's obviously doing consumer neuroscience. But when she said, most of my consumers don't know that the brain runs on electricity, that really, puts into perspective that, to explain even what neuromodulation does, you have to go so many steps back, I guess.
And neuromodulation by itself, if you use TMS as a standard, 4 to 6 weeks. It's kind of intrusive. It's kind of hard to deal with, going to a clinic every single day. And now you see there's 1-day protocols, 5-day protocols. There's, we have a 2-week protocol that we're in FDA with right now. And it's got to get quicker, faster, and feel more consumer friendly for people to adopt it. It's really hard. It's really hard to do something that's antiquated, feels antiquated, and you don't get immediate satisfaction from, in a world where we've created this immediate gratification kind of trigger. So technologies have to get more interesting, and they have to be faster, and they have to be more predictable. And I think that's what the guidance, personalization, the work that Anna is doing, and the work that we're trying to do is guide people to an endpoint that's predetermined, which is ironic. In most areas of medicine, it would be malpractice if you don't have an endpoint you're attempting to achieve. But in psychiatry, it's more of an experimentation, hoping to just relieve some symptoms, but the endpoint maybe is not as defined because it hasn't been able to be defined up until this point.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Fred, but I also think that, when we talk about patients, I usually tell them, about DBS for essential tremor, right? Which people are pretty aware of how, the magic of seeing this tremor and then stopping, which I think is phenomenal. But it's true that TMS, for example, for psychiatry in the US, is starting to get more awareness. And I think that there are other things that are raising awareness. For example, I'm just reading Dan Brown's book. I mean, if you've seen his new book, which is all about consciousness, but this is a mainstream book, he describes precisely an epileptic seizure. And then on the context of consciousness, he's talking about implanted neuromodulation devices. I mean, it's kind of awesome that, in the mainstream Dan Brown new book, all the technologies we are describing here are being put in a science fiction, mainstream book. So I think that also helps patients, and I work constantly with patients, but I think in general, mainstream is avoiding this bad press of the electroshocks of somebody fly over the cuckoo nest and all these things that they did. So, I mean, electroshocks are used in psychiatry today. And they are brutal, but they save millions of lives. People that are suicidal, they go through electroshock therapy and they want to live again. And nobody talks about that because of the bad press. So I think we have to start to change the narrative about electricity being, something really bad for your brain, and change the narrative into something that can really help to see the brain in a different way.
Very true.
Yeah, definitely. Perhaps it's also interesting to quickly touch upon the fact that beyond neuromodulation, there's obviously many different ways to treat. Well, I keep going back to the big one, which is major depressive disorder. So yeah, you have, of course, SSRIs, which are prescribed by the millions, talk therapy, a whole range of new approaches like ketamine and psychedelics. So neuromodulation, in a sense, is just one tool of an expanding toolkit. And what do you see the long-term role of these techniques? And do you see it also maybe combining with different approaches?
Yeah, we are doing studies on the combination of psychedelics and stimulation. And of course, EEG is a way to monitor the impact of that, because we think that if brain stimulation induces plasticity in the brain, then we have to see the win-win of doing brain stimulation with psychedelics. Same for many other approaches. We work very closely with companies like Cognito, which is doing flickering lights for cognitive decline. It's an MIT spin-off that is doing flickering lights to entrain gamma for cognitive decline. That's a new approach also, right? Then we work with other companies that are doing biomarkers. So I think that the future is multimodal, and the brain is so complex that, to your point, Dominic, there is no only one way to deal with it, right? And you have to combine these technologies. And I'm excited about the future. I would love to see this working more on a clinical medical setting before it explodes into the consumer world, because I'm a bit worried about the ethics of what we are doing. I think that our brain is what defines us as human. So if we tap into the brain and there is no a little bit of oversight or control, I think you're risking what it means. What is your agency, your identity, and that's why I think that we have to be a bit cautious. And I love this working on the medical field to then maybe go down to prevention, human enhancement, learning, whatever, right? But tapping into a healthy brain with this kind of interventions, I think it's not a zero-sum game. We don't know enough. That's my very, very personal opinion, but I may be very conservative. So I'm happy to hear what the audience has to say.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think to do this properly and honor the individual and kind of the ethics around this is your distribution or delivery system has to be clinical. It has to be observed by a physician. It has to be with some guardrails on it. I think, and I don't mean this hurts any of the devices that are direct to consumer, but we typically would call those trinkets and trash because you don't know what they are, why they work, or what the gimmick is. And they, unfortunately, and you mentioned one earlier that launched and it didn't really get a good uptake. People didn't have great outcomes. They were kind of a variety of outcomes. And I think the more that happens, the more it sets us back. And so a very clean, focused adoption with the goal of an industry, again, serving humanity, we can do this and we can get great traction against it. But it does have to have the guardrails, and it does need to be clinical to begin with, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think guardrails is also one thing to kind of zoom into a bit, because both of you are collecting a lot of personal data, computational models of the brain, for example. I think eventually there's going to be more attention for neural data. It's already happening. We saw UNESCO with a recommendation. We saw some movement in the US. So more and more people are going to be aware about what their neural data is and why it's sensitive. So how are you treating that already in 2026?
You want to go, Anna? You want me to?
You go, Fred.
Yeah, I mean, one, it's at the core of what we do. We're a data-centric company, and the personal data is incredibly valuable, both for innovation, but also to the individual that we're affecting and creating protocols for. And so with that, I know that NIH and other top institutions are really taking a deep dive and looking into this. I know that their states, I believe California and Colorado have already passed legislation in this regard. I mean, we're a highly regulated business, right? And what we do from just a data compliance standpoint relative to our software, whether it's SOC 2 or any of the things we have to do to that allows us to function as a healthcare company, are extraordinary. But I think we're at the beginning of that story, and I think that there really needs to be a holistic, long view thought. And I'm not saying there isn't, but I just think it has to be more of a holistic, long view thought of protecting the rights of individuals and the unintended consequences, and making sure those are fully accessible and exposed to people before they make decisions to do whether it's deep brain or any form of neuromodulation or stimulation.
Yes, Anna, you want to add on to that?
No, I think that's a great reflection from Fred, right? So I think, I think it's great.
Yeah. I personally worked for a little bit in health data, so I was a consultant in the field, and one of the main principles that we have was data minimization. So if you need 10% of the data, then you only take 10%. But I think in neuroscience, currently more data is better. We obviously see that also in BCI, where the higher bandwidth, the better. But are you already thinking about this kind of trade-off?
Yeah, I mean, in that, I think that when you are a medical device company, of course, you're binded to all these regulations and so on, right? But I think that we have to be careful also in telling the people what we collect and what it means, right? I mean, there are limits to what EEG can do, and Fred knows very well. I mean, this perception that you put an EEG on somebody's or a cap in somebody's brain and you can read their minds and things like that. And again, unlimited data and a lot of data. I mean, in EEG, we work with very sensitive to noise, a very difficult signal, right? So we have to make sure that the signals we collect are with good quality. And I don't think it works in EEG like a lot of data is better, right? Is good enough data. I think that at the point, in the case of mental health or epilepsy, the fact that you can monitor patients where they are not in the hospital is great, because epileptic seizures, for example, they happen at night or in the morning or during the day. And so many patients, they go to the hospital, they get an EEG and they don't see any seizure activity, right? I think that down the line will be the same with depression, right? When you have a crisis, when you have something abnormal, who knows where you are, right? So I think that this is more not the quantity of data, but when and why and for you're collecting that data, right?
Definitely. Anything to add on to that, Fred?
No, I think she hit it perfectly.
I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat, so I think I'll just move on to my final topic, which is more of a personal question. What is the goal for the year? It's only January, and how do you see your role and the industry as a whole evolving this year? Maybe we can start with you, Fred.
It's a exciting year. I'm hoping that we get an FDA clearance on the data and package that we've submitted. I'm hoping that the conversation with payers continues to evolve in a direction where they are willing to reimburse for technologies more so than some of the standard therapies. And I'm hoping we get more collaboration across groups. Really, again, not serving the ivory tower or the institution, but serving humanity, and we can break down some barriers and really bring smart people together in a structured way to stamp out a lot of the illness that exists today in the mental health side.
Amazing. Ana?
Yeah, I mean, for us, and Darth can mention in the audience, I mean, we have been investing almost $25 million in a phase 3 clinical trial on epilepsy. So it's the final results, the top line results, the study's finished will be disclosed May 5th, around May this year. So this is the beauty and the bad thing of an entrepreneur. You may succeed or have thrown 25 million to the bin, right? Because this is what science is about. It's all about the data, right? So that's a major milestone. And in parallel, because we are very active on the research and diagnostic business, improving, our sales and presence all over the world, in emergency rooms, in clinical settings, in research labs, in pharmacies, another thing that we are working very hard on. And it's really beautiful to see so many devices in actions all over the world. So we are very happy with these two strong lines of business.
Great. So I think all in all, it should be an optimistic year for the field. I'm also definitely sharing that opinion. As someone who reads and writes about it all week, I definitely see a lot of momentum this year as well.